But he did also mention that he needs to have synergy with the new defensive coordinator, which tells you he didn't have it with Wilkes. I don't know what these people are talking about. When people are talking about the defense, you need to keep in mind one thing and one thing only. All of these morons like Zach Rosenblather and Tim McMaster-Bader and Country Club Connor and Dick Chimney, Rub It In Rich, where he finds every stat you can imagine that's bad for the Jets and publishes it and talks about it. All of these morons don't really understand defense. The basic things you need to understand when we're talking about finding a fucking defensive coordinator who knows what the fuck they are doing. First thing you need to understand is not blitzing and not man fucking coverage. It's, are we a 4-3 or a goddamn 3-4? If these idiots in the fucking media don't start talking about the differences between a 4-3 and a 3-4, I think I might lose my mind. Okay? Now, some of you longtime listeners will understand and know. This is something that's been a little bit of a bugaboo of mine, going all the way back to the time when I was on Gunny's show. Remember when I was on Gunny Gumby's show? Master Sergeant Gumby, Gunny, remember? A lot of people got mad at old Frankie for going on that show and saying, hey, our defense is way overrated the way our personnel are right now. It's not the same defense. At this point, we were transitioning from year 3 to 4, and I said we lost too many people on defensive line for it to be any good in this scheme. And everybody said, why? And flipped out and were throwing tomatoes at me in the chat. Okay? Turned out I was right because I know what I'm talking about. And then I came back after the season to gloat on Gunny's show, and people got mad at me again for suggesting perhaps we should switch to a 3-4. Now, just switching to a 3-4 doesn't magically, change things, but I was proposing something a little different. And people didn't like that. And part of it is that these media people who influence so many people, I can only influence like 10 people maybe. But big media, the big media people, they can influence tens of thousands. They can influence the whole fucking fan base, let's be honest. So what we want is for them to understand the difference and start talking about the difference. A 4-down front is an attacking 1-gap front. That means you have 4 down linemen, and they pick a gap, which means left or right of the person in front of them. This is very simplified, but this is the basics you need to understand about defense. And they just go into that gap. They either go to the guy's left or his right. They get one, and then they go upfield, and that's it. Well, that's not it, but that's sort of like phase 1. That's what we ran under Saleh. That's what the Atlanta Falcons run. It's what the Houston Texans run. It's what San Francisco runs, of course. It's what Denver runs. It's what a lot of the big defenses run, the really good ones in the modern day. And for that, you need 8 or 10 really good and 2 or 3 all-pro defensive lineman level players. Now, a 3-4 is a 2-gap read and react system. Your defensive linemen, there's 3 of them. That's why it's called a 3-4. The defensive linemen go into their offensive linemen, hold them up, do not attack yet, look over their left, look over their right. That's why it's called a 2-gap. And depending what's going on in the backfield, they decide at that point how to shed that block and either go left or right. That's why it's called 2-gapping. This is very, very basic. This is the very basics of defense. This is not a Joe Blewett type review here. But that is the very first thing that needs to be discussed with any of these candidates. Because if you're talking about Brian Flores and you're talking about Wink Martindale, those are 3-4 people. And so you would think, since Aaron Glenn said, I'm going to need synergy and it's going to need to align with me on defense, those guys are probably out unless he's talking about something else. I mean, because traditionally, Aaron Glenn runs a 4-3 defense. And if that's the case, so then if we get Radio Raheem Morris or we get somebody else who, traditionally runs a 4-3, then you go, okay, we're going to be in a 4-3. Then you have to invest in your defensive line. Must. You cannot have too many great defensive linemen. When one comes available, you get them. You trade for him, you sign him in free agency, you overpay for him, you draft him, you overdraft him. You cannot have enough of these guys if that's what you're running. Now, if we hire somehow a Brian Flores, unlikely. Wink Martindale, maybe likely. That one, he's less of a hot name right now, and maybe just looking to get back into the NFL, and maybe just wants to be back in New York where he was with the Giants for a while. Settle back in over there before he retires. He's getting up there in age. So I would say Martindale is probably more likely than Flores for us. But if he comes, then it's a total change in personnel, and it's going to be more linebackers. That's the 4 part of the 3-4, and fewer defensive linemen. So instead of these fucking morons like Zach Rosenblatt, they're talking about man fucking coverage. It drives me insane. If you want to lose a bunch of fucking football games, run a bunch of man coverage. Especially against a mobile quarterback. It's one thing if you got Jared Goff or fucking Aaron Rodgers or, Kirk Cousins back there. Okay, run some man because they're not going to run on you. But in our division, we got Josh fucking Allen, Drake fucking May, and who knows what the hell's going on with the Dolphins. But against those two, for sure, you cannot run a lot of man coverage. The other thing with man coverage, if you're going to run it, you need a hellacious pass rush. Hellacious, because they need to get to the quarterback in fewer than 2.5 seconds. And you're hoping that your corners and everybody playing man just holds up for 2.5, 2.7 seconds, and that's it. Any longer than that, and they're going to get cooked. And so you can't have the quarterback running around and doing all this. You need to get to his ass within 2.5 seconds. So if you're just talking about man coverage and you're not talking about, well, they've got a hellacious pass rush like the Texans, with Danielle Hunter, the real deal Danielle Hunter, and Will Anderson and all those people we got. They got Sheldon Rankins down there. They got tons of dudes. Our old, Sheldon Rankins used to be with us because fits the solid defense, which is the D'Amico Ryans defense. It's the same thing. If you're not talking about that part of the defense being hellacious, you cannot run man. You will get burned very quickly. All right. You had to get that off your chest, didn't you, Frankie? Well, yeah, but it's relevant to our DC search because all these idiots are talking about man coverage and all they wanted to talk about when Ahmad Gardner was here was, well, are you going to travel with the people? Aren't you a real man and aren't you going to travel? That's so fucking stupid. Oh my God, is that stupid? You do not want Ahmad Gardner traveling with anyone. God, he's not Darrelle Revis, for God's sakes. These people have no idea what they're talking about.